The Earth was young, and though its surface had settled from the chaos of its violent birth, it still trembled with a restless heartbeat. Once, this world had been nothing more than molten stone, rivers of fire running across its face, mountains rising only to melt back into the inferno. Now, though the scars of its fiery youth still glowed, the planet had cooled enough to welcome something entirely new: water. It began with clouds, enormous, endless clouds, heavy with steam that circled the Earth like a thick gray blanket. For countless ages, they poured down rain without pause. Drops fell endlessly from a sky that never cleared, hissing against still-hot rocks, running down blackened slopes and pooling in the lowest places. Valleys filled, craters brimmed, and soon entire basins were swallowed by rising tides. The rain did not cease for centuries upon centuries. The Earth was being washed clean, its skin softened by the embrace of water. From this gift, oceans were born, vast, restless, and mysterious, stretching farther than any horizon could hold. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of this primeval shore. There is no sand beneath your feet, no gentle dunes shaped by time. Instead, jagged volcanic rock forms the coast, sharp and dark, steaming where the waves crash against it. The air smells of sulfur and rain, thick with the tang of minerals. Overhead, the sky is not blue but a restless swirl of copper, gray, and smoke. The sun, pale and weak, fights to pierce through the haze, casting only faint light on the restless seas. And always, there is lightning, endless forks of light that split the sky, striking water and stone with sparks of fire. Thunder rolls across the land like the voice of a sleeping giant, never ceasing, never silent. The ocean itself is alive, though not yet with creatures. Its waves roll heavy and dark, carrying within them the ingredients of something greater. Dissolved metals shimmer in the depths. Carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus drift in unseen currents. Salts and minerals mix freely, carried by tides that rise and fall beneath the pull of the young moon. Each wave that crashes against the rocks, each droplet lifted by the wind, carries whispers of possibilities not yet realized. The sea is a cauldron, simmering with potential, heated from beneath, stirred by storms above, waiting for the moment when chance and order will meet. Venture below the surface, and the story deepens. In the darkness of the ocean floor, heat escapes from cracks in the Earth's crust. Their hydrothermal vents rise like black chimneys, belching water so hot it shimmers like smoke, rich with minerals that spill out like hidden treasure. Around them, strange gardens of chemistry thrive. Water boils and cools in cycles, currents twist and mingle, and the minerals coat the rocks in layers of shimmering crystals. Though no living eye yet watches, the seafloor glows faintly in the dark, a world of warmth hidden beneath miles of silence. Each vent, each mineral surface, is a tiny laboratory, an experiment carried out by the Earth itself. Molecules drift close, cling for a moment, and part again, a dance of chance repeated endlessly across the ocean floor. The ocean is not a passive sea, it is a restless creative spirit. Lightning kisses the surface, delivering sparks that awaken new bonds. Sunlight, weak though it is, filters into shallow pools near the shore, warming them with gentle energy. Waves crash, mixing air and water, stirring oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide into the brew. The tides sweep in and out, lifting droplets that dry in the sun and then return to the sea, concentrating chemicals like careful hands adding spice to a pot. Everywhere on the shorelines, in the shallows, in the abyssal depths, the recipe of life is being prepared. The Earth is both chef and cauldron, both kitchen and keeper of secrets. And time is the most patient of ingredients. Nothing happens quickly here. Millions of years pass like hours, each moment indistinguishable from the last, yet each carrying some tiny change forward. Molecules form, dissolve, and form again. Most vanish, never to be remembered, but a few linger, a few remain intact, and in those rare survivors lies the spark of something eternal. The ocean's cauldron is more than water. It is memory in the making, a place where the first stories are whispered though no ear can hear them. Picture the waves at night, when the storms momentarily quiet, and the sea lies beneath a sky filled with young stars. The surface glimmers, dark and restless, while deep below, vents glow like embers in the hearth of the world. The Earth cradles its oceans like a parent rocking a child, soothing and steady, holding in its arms the fragile beginnings of what will become life itself. Though no creatures swim, no plants grow, and no voices call, the ocean is far from empty. Within its mineral embrace, the first fragile ingredients are already reaching for one another, already beginning their slow, patient dance. It will be ages yet before their efforts bear fruit, but already, beneath the weight of storms and silence, the blueprint of life stirs. The sea waits, the world waits, and within the stillness of those waters, DNA's story begins, not yet written, but already dreaming. Above the newborn oceans, the sky was never still. It was a restless theater of cloud and storm, a stage where fire and water performed endlessly for an audience of no one. The air itself was heavy with steam, rolling in thick curtains that hid the faint sun, trapping the earth in a twilight of copper and ash. Great columns of cloud stretched upward, their bellies swollen with rain, and from their darkened hearts came lightning. Not the occasional flash we know today, but storms that never slept, a world forever alive with the pulse of light and thunder. Each strike of lightning tore open the sky, forking in jagged white lines that illuminated the restless seas below. They came in endless succession, thousands upon thousands every hour, so frequent that the darkness of night was never truly complete. The air smelled of ozone, sharp and metallic, while the rolling thunder echoed across oceans and land alike, a sound so constant it became the heartbeat of the planet. These storms were not destruction, they were creation, bringing sparks to a world waiting for them. Each flash carried energy enough to split molecules apart and bind them anew. Each crack of lightning was a painter's stroke, reshaping the unseen chemistry of the atmosphere. The oceans welcomed this gift eagerly. Along the coasts, where tides pulled in shallow pools, the lightning struck again and again, boiling the water in flashes of white fire. Droplets hissed into steam, and within that heat new bonds formed, fragile chains of molecules, some breaking apart in moments, others clinging together with quiet persistence. What today we would call amino acids, nucleotides, and building blocks of life were in those days mere accidents of storm and sea. But accidents repeated endlessly, day after day, age after age, until chance became inevitability. Volcanoes added their voice to the chorus. Across the world, mountains of fire rose, their peaks glowing like embers against the storm-filled sky. Rivers of molten rock carved their way down slopes, meeting the ocean in clouds of steam. The earth exhaled through vents and fissures, filling the air with sulfur and methane, carbon dioxide and ammonia. To the early atmosphere, these gases were not poison, but potential, new notes added to the symphony of creation. Lightning ignited them, weaving sparks through their chemical haze, setting the air aglow with possibilities. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of this world. You would hear nothing but the roar of waves, the crash of thunder, the hiss of rain meeting molten stone. The very ground beneath your feet would tremble with the earth's breath, warm and unsteady, while above you the sky cracked open again and again with light. It would seem chaotic, overwhelming, but within that chaos, something delicate was being nurtured. The lightning was not random. It was a key striking chords across the atmosphere, unlocking doors that had long been closed. Every storm was a lesson written into the air. Each flash of light tore apart simple molecules, scattering their pieces into a sea of possibilities. In the aftermath of each strike, as the air cooled and the rain fell, new combinations emerged. Simple gases became more complex, their fragments clinging into chains, their chains forming patterns. The storms repeated this lesson over and over, endlessly patient, as if the sky itself were teaching the sea how to dream of life. And so, while the earth shook with fire and the heavens tore themselves open, the oceans grew richer. Shallow pools on volcanic coasts became small laboratories, each one unique. Some dried in the heat of the sun, concentrating their contents until the next tide returned. Others remained brimming, warmed by underground heat, their waters shimmering with dissolved minerals. Lightning struck them all, leaving invisible signatures of creation behind. There is a strange comfort in knowing that life's earliest ingredients came not in peace, but in storm. The very forces that today we often fear, lightning, fire, eruption, were once guardians of creation. They gave energy to a world that needed awakening, and though no creature yet lived to see it, every strike of lightning, every exhalation of fire, every rolling thunder carried forward the story of life. And time did not hurry. The storms raged for millennia, then for millions of years. The lightning never ceased, the volcanoes never slept, and the oceans continued to receive their gifts in silence. While the surface of the earth appeared chaotic, beneath the waves, in hidden pools and simmering vents, order was beginning to emerge from chance. The sparks of heaven and the breath of earth had joined in partnership, and together they stirred the ocean's cauldron toward something greater. So the planet breathed fire and lightning, unceasing, untamed. Each storm was a heartbeat, each eruption a breath, each wave a whisper. And within that restless symphony, molecules began their quiet dance, practicing steps they would one day perfect into the music of life. Beneath the rolling oceans, far below the reach of storm and sun, there existed a world unseen. Darkness lay heavy here, unbroken and eternal, yet it was not silent. The seafloor, scarred and cracked from the restless movements of the planet's crust, exhaled its breath into the abyss. From fissures in the earth rose great chimneys of black stone, some towering like cathedrals, some squat and crooked like ancient ruins. They belched out water heated until it shimmered, laced with iron, sulfur, and countless other minerals. These were the hydrothermal vents, the hidden alchemists of the deep. The water around them was alive with strange contrasts. Superheated streams burst forth at hundreds of degrees, yet only a short distance away, the cold embrace of the deep ocean cooled them back into stillness. This ceaseless mixing created tiny pockets, countless microenvironments, each with its own recipe, each with its own conditions. Here the ocean was no longer uniform. It became a patchwork quilt of chemistry, stitched together by the threads of heat and minerals. Every vent was like a cauldron within the greater cauldron of the sea, each one working tirelessly in silence, repeating experiments in patience. Imagine drifting through this hidden realm. Around you, the vents glow faintly in the darkness, shimmering like lanterns in a cave. The water is thick with minerals, glittering as they fall and settle, coating rocks in delicate layers of crystal. Each mineral surface acts as a stage where molecules cling and release, where bonds form and break. It is as though the very stones are helping, offering their surfaces as writing desks upon which chemistry might scrawl its first letters. The alchemy of these places was not sudden magic, but slow, deliberate craft. Here, simple gases and dissolved molecules met again and again, guided by the geometry of crystals, by the heat of the vents, by the currents that swirled through their chambers. Some encounters dissolved into nothing, lost forever. Others created fleeting forms that lasted a heartbeat before breaking apart. But a few, just a precious few, endured. They grew into longer chains, into fragile threads, into shapes that hinted at stability. And in those survivors lay the seeds of memory, though no living creature yet existed to recall them. The vents worked tirelessly. For millions of years, they exhaled warmth into the abyss, and in that warmth, chance became repetition, and repetition became inevitability. Each cycle was like a breath, inhaling and exhaling the building blocks of life, sculpting them without intention, yet with profound effect. It was an alchemy not driven by hands or mind, but by the quiet partnership of water, stone, and heat. There is something comforting in the thought of these hidden chambers. While the surface world raged with fire and storm, beneath the waves, the vents whispered softly, like guardians at work in secret. Their fires did not burn with destruction, but with care, as though the earth itself had placed a hearth in the deepest dark, keeping watch over the beginnings of life. Though no eyes yet looked upon them, no ears yet heard, their work mattered. The oceans above may have seemed vast and empty, but in these small, hidden places, the first true patterns were forming. They were fragile, fleeting, and rare, but they were real. The vents were patient, for patience was their only language. They did not hurry, did not falter, but simply gave of themselves, breath after breath, age after age, until at last, the chemistry of chance began to resemble the chemistry of life. The hidden alchemy of the deep ocean was not a single miracle, but 1,000 tiny ones, repeated endlessly, woven together into a fabric strong enough to endure. And though it would be billions of years before this fabric stretched into the forms we know as plants, animals, and people, its threads were already being spun here, in the warm embrace of the Earth's hidden fires. So the ocean cradled its secret hearths, quiet, steady, and unseen. The storms above raged on, but down here, in the still darkness, molecules found one another, held one another, and began to whisper the first syllables of life. The oceans, stirred by storm and fire, had become a vast library of possibility. Though no words yet existed, the waters carried fragments that longed to join together. In the endless mixing of minerals, gases, and energy, something simple but profound began to form. Tiny molecules, delicate and fleeting, that would one day be recognized as the letters of life's alphabet. These were the nucleotides, though no name yet bound them, no thought yet conceived of them. They were small, fragile arrangements of atoms, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, each coming together in patterns that had never before existed in the universe. They drifted in the waters like sparks, like motes of dust suspended in sunlight. The sea had become not only a cauldron, not only a hearth, but now a desk where the first letters were written, one by one, into the great manuscript of time. Imagine peering into one of those shallow tidal pools near a volcanic shore. The water is warm, stirred gently by the wind, kissed by sunlight filtering through the haze above. Drops of rain fall into it, carrying minerals from the rocks. The tide rolls in, leaving behind traces of salt and organic fragments. And as the water evaporates beneath the weak sun, the molecules within grow closer, pressing against one another, searching for bonds. When lightning strikes nearby and heat surges through the pool, the molecules rearrange, briefly forming new shapes. When the water returns, it stirs them again, offering them another chance. In these simple, repeating cycles, the building blocks of life are slowly inscribed into the world. The nucleotides are like letters scattered across a page. Alone, they hold potential but no meaning. Yet together, they could one day form words, and words could form sentences, and sentences could tell the story of life itself. At this moment, however, they are only drifting, waiting for the rhythm of waves and the spark of energy to guide them. The ocean holds them close, rocking them in its endless embrace, patient as ever. Down in the depths, where the hydrothermal vents continue their secret work, other letters are being written. The minerals here act as scribes, arranging molecules along their surfaces in patterns that repeat, patterns that invite. It is as though the earth itself is trying out alphabets, sketching and erasing, forming lines of text that dissolve and then reappear. There is no rush, for the story of life is not written in haste. It is written in patience, in repetition, in the quiet persistence of chance. From the perspective of time, these letters were plentiful. For millions upon millions of years, they appeared and disappeared, born in storms, dissolved in waves, reassembled in the deep. Most were lost, their brief lives forgotten by the waters. But some lingered, held together just long enough to touch another, to link, to form something slightly larger, slightly more enduring. When one chain broke, another formed. When one dissolved, the ocean gave birth to 1,000 more. There is a quiet poetry in imagining those first nucleotides drifting in the sea. They had no awareness, no purpose, and yet they were the foundation of everything to come. Every tree that would one day stretch its leaves toward the sky, every creature that would crawl, swim, or fly, every thought that would ever flicker in the mind of a human, all of it depended on those first simple letters. At the time, though, the world remained silent. The oceans held their secret, rocking the letters gently in their embrace. There were no voices to read them, no minds to understand them. The letters were scattered across the water, waiting to be arranged into meaning. But already, in their fragile shapes, the promise of life was written. Already, the ocean had become more than a cauldron. It had become a page, upon which time would write the first chapter of the living world. And so the letters lingered, drifting on waves, clinging to rocks, hidden in the warmth of vents. They were fragile, fleeting, but they were enough. For once letters exist, words are inevitable. And once words are born, stories must follow. The story of life was still in its infancy, still nothing more than scattered fragments. But the ocean was patient, and time was kind, and together they held these letters close, ensuring that one day they would speak. The letters drifted for a long while, years that felt like centuries, centuries that slipped into ages, until the ocean, ever patient, began to thread them together. It did not happen all at once. It was not a trumpet blast or a sudden leap, but a quiet tendency, a habit the waters developed, a favored rhythm of bond and release. Where before there had been only solitary syllables, now the sea started to try a phrase. The first chains took shape, short at first, delicate, prone to breaking, yet real, and for a heartbeat longer than anything that had come before. Picture a shore of black rock still warm from the planet's breath. The tide rolls in carrying its scattered alphabet, then rolls back out, leaving behind thin films of brine that glitter on the stone. Under a shy sun, the films tighten. The water doesn't vanish so much as it narrows, coaxing the letters closer. Heat nudges them, a gentle insistence. You two hold hands, You 3 see if you can make a line. When the water returns, it lifts the new-made threads and sways with them, as if testing their balance, as if asking whether they can endure a little motion, a little time. Over and over, the routine repeats, wet and dry, dry and wet, a breathing of the shore that teaches the letters to become something more than letters. Farther out, in the twilight, where the waves grow heavy, mineral surfaces wait like old wooden tables in a quiet workshop. Clays and crystals offer ridges and hollows, modest and unassuming, where the letters settle and line up. On these textured pages, something about the spacing and the angles favors joining. An atom reaches, another answers, a small clasp clicks into place. The chain is still short, only a few links, but it is a chain nonetheless. The ocean does not celebrate. It simply carries on, and the chain survives a few heartbeats longer than its predecessors. That small surplus of time, an extra borrowed breath, is all creation ever asks for. The newborn threads are not yet graceful. They fold awkwardly, kink and fray, and their ends slip free with the lightest tug. Many dissolve before the next wave arrives. Some do not outlast the afternoon, but a few do, and those few pass through the night. Cold tightens their grasp. Dawn loosens it but adds more letters to their sides. The day warms the rock again, the sea returns with new gifts, and the small, stuttering choreography continues. There is no plan, only persistence. There is no author, only the patience of repetition. In the deep, the vents keep their own slow heartbeat, writing in darkness what the shores write in light. Here the chains grow in a different way. They gather along narrow throats of mineral chimneys where hot and cold water meet, slipping through gradients of temperature and chemistry like threads pulled through a loom. A link forms, is jostled loose, forms again, holds, invites another. The chimney's walls are crowded with half-finished sentences, with crossed-out attempts, with promising fragments that tangle and separate. None of it is wasted. Every failure frees letters for another trial. Every success becomes a platform for the next. As chains lengthen, a new behavior whispers in. A strand, once it reaches a certain size, does not lie straight anymore. It bends on itself and discovers that, here and there, a letter along its spine is pleased to rest against a neighbor in a way that feels steady. Wherever that comfort is real, the strand pauses. Where it is not, it shifts, searching. With these first tiny foldings, the ocean invents shape. A loop holds a little better, a hairpin survives a little longer, a twist makes a pocket that cradles the whole. Form begins to guard function, though there are as yet no functions beyond endurance. Even so, endurance is enough. The seas are full of brief things, the things that last earn time, and time, more than any other gift, allows the world to learn. On some afternoons, when the storms walk the horizon and the sky brightens with sudden veins of light, the shore's thin films sparkle as if strewn with invisible embroidery. Lightning has spoken again, split a nearby molecule, made the air ring with energy, and somewhere in that shimmer another clasp has tightened. The chain that survives the next rinse is slightly longer, its spine a little straighter, its bend a little softer. It is not yet a sentence, not yet a word, but it has the feel of grammar, the sense that something about its order helps it remain itself. There are countless ways to fail and very few ways to hold. The ocean explores them all. Threads snap at their ends. Joints peel apart where the angle is unkind. Loops that once seemed sturdy open with a sigh when the night grows too cold or the day too warm. Yet in the enormous arithmetic of ages, the tally leans, ever so slightly, toward those combinations that linger. Not because they meant to, but because the world has many ways to unsettle and relatively few ways to favor. The chains that can be favored are, and those that are favored gather length the way a coastline gathers shells. Not quickly, not evenly, but inevitably. Soon enough, though soon means only that the sea remembers, it happens that one chain meets another. They drift close, touch in a pair of places that feel companionable, and rest together for a while. Their closeness does not last, but while it does, each is steadied by the other's presence. Then the current breaks them apart, and each drifts away slightly less fragile for having found the posture that contact demanded. The world learns again. A neighbor can be a brace, a nearby rhythm a shield. In a shallow pool, heated to a pleasant warmth by sun and rock, a thread grows long enough to arch, bridge, and just barely span from one mineral nook to another. Anchored at both ends, its middle is free to flutter, and in that flutter it encounters new letters. Some cling transiently, then leave. Some settle and convert their brief greeting into belonging. The anchored thread thickens. It is still humble, a ladder missing most rungs, but where the rungs exist, traffic moves more easily. A letter that might have drifted on is caught and kept until the heat loosens it again. In this catch and release, length accumulates. There are moments of almost story. A gust of warm wind lowers the waterline in a tide pool. The film concentrates. Several nearby chains, once strangers, are pressed side by side. They lie there, the way reeds lie across one another, and for a few breaths, each supports the other's shape. Then a small wave arrives, slides a thin sleeve of water across them, and their companionship ends. But not without consequence. Their brief meeting has taught each how to bend in a way that keeps stress away from their weakest joints. Next time the tide breathes out, they will align faster. Next time, a rung will catch that it did not before. Elsewhere, a chain learns that if its tail curls backward, it can hug its own middle and turn a stretched line into a compact figure. The curl is not elegant. It is lumpy and short. It is also sturdy. The compact figure bumps less, flexes less, survives more. Survival earns another try, and another, until one day the curl holds long enough for a few new letters to fasten along its side. What began as a makeshift embrace became an architecture. Up in the sky, the storms take no notice of any of this patient craft. They voice their thunder, scatter their rain, and turn the light to silver where it strikes the sea. At night, between storms, the stars appear and pour a thin milk of radiance into the water. Some of it lands on shore and warms a stone, some of it sinks. The energy is small, but it is steady, and steady is what chains prefer. The difference between almost and enough is often a steady thing, an extra degree of warmth, a slightly longer afternoon, a tide that lingers a minute more. If you could hold one of the first chains, if you could cup it in a quiet palm and look at it without destroying it, you would not think it grand. You would see a line of small, modest links, most poorly matched, a few aligned as if two neighbors had learned the same dance. You would notice the spine itself, the rhythm of its connections, and sense that the rhythm mattered as much as the letters it carried. A spine that repeats in a regular way is a kind of invitation. It says, attach here at this interval, try there at the next. It says, I am a path, see if you can walk it. And the letters do. When a chain is long enough, an odd thing sometimes happens. Scattered letters in the sea feel more welcome near it than far away. They rest against it briefly, like travelers leaning on a fence, and while they rest, the fence persuades them to line up with one another. It is not copying, not yet. It is companionship with a hint of instruction, a suggestion that a line can beget a line that looks somewhat the same. Even half-remembered likeness is more than the ocean had yesterday. The world, friendly to echoes, lanes toward them. Not every place favors the same attempt. Along one rocky inlet, the wet-dry cycles do most of the teaching. Along another, where the ground stays slick and the sun is shy, mineral shelves do the work. In the deep, heat is the tutor and cold the exam. Each classroom produces its own dialect of chain. Some dialects vanish, others leave loanwords behind. All of them contribute to the sense that a language is emerging, not the tongue of minds, but the syntax of shape and sequence. Once or twice in 1,000 dawns, a chain drifts into a protected corner, a hollow in a stone, a pocket behind a ridge, where the water is calm and the temperature kind. It rests, breathing with the sea. There, undisturbed, it learns the way a vine learns a trellis. The shape of the hollow suggests a curve, the chain adopts it, and the curve redistributes strain. The chain lasts the afternoon, then the night, then another day beyond. Length arises not by assaulting the world, but by listening to it, by learning the bends that the surroundings permit. The ocean is full of these modest triumphs, a chain keeping its shape in a tide it once failed, a link that no longer loosens at a certain angle, a fold that forms hours earlier than it used to. None of it is glamorous, all of it is decisive. When the next storm walks ashore and hurls foam across the rocks, many of the chains are swept away, but a few are not. They cling to a seam, a crack, a shadow. When the water falls back, those few breathe again and take inventory. What has been learned remains. What remains earns the chance to learn more. In time, the only currency large enough for such matters, the first chains cease to feel like astonishments and begin to feel like features of the place. The shore expects them the way a garden expects seedlings after rain. The vents expect them the way a hearth expects embers after wood has been laid. The world, which has tried so many brief arrangements, now begins to default to several that hold. Not everywhere, not always, but here and there with a regularity that feels, if not like law, then like custom. From custom, strength, from strength, possibility. A chain that persists through a dozen cycles encounters not only free letters, but other chains that have also persisted. Alignments become easier. Rungs that were once rare appear twice in the same afternoon. A thread anchored at one end finds a friend to anchor the other. Between the anchors, length stretches and narrows, and the narrowing becomes a habit, an economy, so that even when the thread drifts free again, it keeps the memory of that taut shape. Memory in these seas is not a thought, it is a posture that survived. There is tenderness in the way the world holds these first chains. Storms will still tear them, waves will still toss them, heat will still tempt their joints apart, yet the same forces that imperil them also teach them their craft. The shore's breathing, the vent's warmth, the mineral's patience, together they give the threads both trial and shelter. The chains do not become strong by avoiding trouble, but by passing through it again and again until the weak angles are gone. One evening, as clouds thin and a diluted sunset finds the water, a long chain drifts across a patch of stone that has, over months, learned how to host such visitors. It settles, and a breeze calms the pool so gently that the surface only shivers. Loose letters arrive and rest along the chain's spine in a stray, partial order that feels familiar. When the night cools the pool, several of those letters harden into place. Morning returns them to the sea, but not to the disorder they knew before. They carry with them a hint of a line. These are still first chains, awkward, fragile, brief, but their brevity is not as brief as it was. A few survive long enough to meet the same pocket twice, to recognize the same fold, to make the same rung in the same place. Repetition edits. It trims what fails and keeps what holds, and in that trimming the lines grow cleaner. Where yesterday there were letters, today there are phrases. Where there are phrases today, tomorrow there will be something that, under the right light, in a kindly pool, could be mistaken for the beginning of a sentence. The ocean does not pronounce this achievement. It only sways and gleams and keeps its enormous counsel. But in the hush between thunder and wave, the world has moved a measure forward. Threads exist where none did. Shapes persist where none could. A spine of repeating joins, simple, firm, and patient, has begun to feel like a law the sea would like to keep. In that law lies the first comfort of heredity, not yet the true passing on of exactness, but the passing on of habit. Chains that learned how to endure teach other chains without meaning to, simply by being good neighbors. And habits, once a world learns them, are hard to unlearn. So the first chains become many. They have become common. The common becomes a background against which the next quiet miracle can step forward. For now, it is enough that the ocean knows how to thread its letters. It can make a line. It can keep that line through a day, perhaps through a night. The rest, how a line might suggest another like itself, how two lines might collaborate, how a code might one day nest inside a spine, will have its hour. But here, in this chapter of the sea's long story, the music is the joining itself, the littlest handclasp, the modest rung, the small, insistent click by which the world learns to hold. The chains were born, fragile though they were, and the ocean carried them as though they were lullabies sung too softly to last. Each one, a thread of letters bound together, moved through the tides with a grace that was hesitant, a melody just learning its notes. The world was filled with these delicate songs, short and fleeting, some broken before they could finish their first refrain. Yet for every song that dissolved, a new one began. The ocean, endlessly patient, composed again and again. Imagine the sound of those first songs, not sound as we know it, for there were no ears to hear, no wind to carry music. But in the rhythm of bonds forming and breaking, in the steady percussion of atoms joining hands and letting go, there was a cadence. The sea was an orchestra, and the fragile chains were its first notes. They played in tidal pools warmed by sun and storm, in dark caverns lit by the breath of hydrothermal vents. Each environment was a different instrument, its tones subtle, its harmonies accidental yet beautiful. On the shores, where the tide rolled in and retreated, the chains swayed with the water's breath. Each cycle was a chorus, the drying pools concentrating the letters, urging them closer, and the returning tide sweeping them into movement. The melody was never the same, yet always familiar. In this repetition, the fragile songs gained rhythm. Though many faltered, some found patterns that lasted a little longer, their tunes repeating with surprising consistency. These were not yet the full symphonies of life, but they were the earliest refrains, practice runs of the grand music to come. In the deep, the songs sounded differently. The chimneys of the vents whispered their own tune, the hot and cold currents rising and sinking like the rise and fall of notes on a scale. Chains that clung to mineral walls played staccato rhythms, snapping together and then breaking apart with each fluctuation in temperature. Those that found themselves caught in sheltered hollows hummed quietly for longer, their bonds steadied by the stillness of their surroundings. Here in the silent abyss, the songs were slow and patient, low tones that carried in the darkness for as long as the chain endured. The fragile songs were not strong. A change in temperature could silence them. A sudden wave could scatter their notes into silence, yet every silence gave birth to new attempts. For millions of years, the sea composed its fragile songs, fading and returning, each one slightly different, each one a new experiment in the music of being. The beauty of these songs was not in their perfection, but in their persistence. They refused to stop. They refused to be forgotten. Picture again a tidal pool at twilight. The storm has just passed, and the surface of the water is calm, broken only by the ripple of a breeze. Beneath that stillness, countless chains drift in loose arrangements, their fragile bonds clinging and releasing. A few last until dawn, their shapes intact, their fragile melody carried from one day into another. It is as though the ocean, with infinite patience, is humming to itself, quiet, steady, determined. And though no creature exists to remember these songs, though no mind hears their fragile notes, they matter. For every refrain that lingers is a rehearsal for the future. Every surviving bond is a reminder to the sea of how music might endure. The fragile songs, in their brevity, carry the secret of something timeless, that even the faintest melody, repeated often enough, can one day become eternal. The chains were not yet life, not yet memory, but they were songs sung against silence. They were whispers carried across the ages, fragile but insistent. And in time, as the world continued to play, those whispers would grow louder. The songs would lengthen, their notes would deepen, and the ocean's fragile music would one day become the anthem of life. The ocean was alive with movement, not the movements of creatures, for none yet stirred, but the restless motions of molecules, billions upon billions of tiny dancers, swirling, colliding, and parting again in an endless ballet. Every drop of water was a ballroom, every current a sweeping motion of unseen partners meeting and separating in patterns too intricate to count. This was not chaos, though to the eye it might seem so. It was a dance without music, but not without rhythm. The rhythm came from heat and cold, from waves and tides, from the storm above and the fire below. It came from the heartbeat of the planet itself, still young, still burning, still exhaling warmth into the seas. Within this rhythm, the molecules found themselves in motion, their collisions guided by laws older than stars, by forces so subtle yet so absolute that even the smallest chain could not ignore them. Imagine standing at the edge of this molecular dance. In a single cup of water, there are more dancers than stars in the sky. They twirl endlessly, some brushing past one another like strangers in a crowd, others colliding with such intensity that sparks of change ignite between them. Most encounters last but a moment, two dancers meeting, spinning, and parting again. But some, a rare few, clasp hands and hold. Those hand clasps form the steps of a new routine, steps that can be remembered, steps that can be repeated. The dance played out across every environment. In the shallow pools, the molecules swayed to the rhythm of the tides. They pressed closer as the pools dried beneath the sun, only to scatter again when the waters returned. Each cycle was a lesson in movement, a rehearsal of steps that would, in time, become familiar. In the depths, the dance was slower, guided by the rise and fall of hot water from the vents. Here the dancers swirled around columns of warmth, their collisions softened by the dark and steady embrace of the deep. In every place, the dance carried on, never stopping, never tiring. And the chains, those fragile songs from before, joined the dance as well. They drifted like ribbons across the floor, their spines offering handholds for new letters. Some danced clumsily, tripping and breaking apart. Others found balance, learning to bend and twist without falling. These were not yet masters of the dance, but apprentices practicing steps that would one day become the very rhythm of life. What made this dance remarkable was its patience. There was no audience, no applause, no urgency. Time itself was the choreographer, guiding the molecules gently through their endless rehearsal. Millions of years passed as they danced, each collision a chance for a new step, each clasp a possible beginning. Most ended in silence, but the dance was tireless, and chance, given enough time, begins to look like destiny. Picture, if you will, a tide pool beneath the storm-filled sky. Lightning flashes above, striking the water with energy that ripples through every dancer. In that moment, the molecules whirl faster, their collisions more eager, their hand clasps more insistent. Out of 1,000 fleeting embraces, 1 or 2 last. When the storm moves on and the pool lies quiet again, those rare embraces remain, tiny threads of memory in a world that has none. This is how the dance progressed, not in leaps, but in countless small steps, each one building upon the last. The ocean was full of such moments. A wave pushing molecules together here, a vent stirring them there, a current carrying them into unexpected meetings. Each encounter was unique, each dance step a little different, and though most ended in nothing, enough survived to build a rhythm that would echo into eternity. The dance was no longer random flailing, but a pattern, subtle, fragile, but real. There is something cozy in imagining this dance. Though no eye could see it, though no mind could name it, the molecules moved with a persistence that felt like joy. They were tireless, unceasing, devoted to their endless waltz, and in their motion, they carried the seeds of everything to come. The dance of molecules was the first music of life, the first choreography of creation. It was practice for a performance that would someday fill the earth with forests, with creatures, with voices. But for now, it was enough that they danced, endlessly, patiently, beneath the waves. The molecules did not know what they were building, did not know that their fragile steps were weaving a tapestry. Yet with every clasp and every release, they added another thread. The ocean was their stage, the earth their orchestra, and time their audience. Together, they moved in harmony, crafting patterns that would endure long after the storms had quieted and the fires had dimmed. And so the dance went on. Night and day, storm and calm, heat and cold, the dancers never stopped. Their fragile steps became habits, their habits became patterns, and their patterns became the first true rhythms of life. It was not yet DNA, not yet the eternal code, but it was the prelude. A dance that began in silence and would one day resound across all the world. From the fragile songs and the endless dance, something new began to rise, threads that could do more than survive. These were the ancestors of memory, chains that hinted at the possibility of recording, of passing something forward, even if it was nothing more than a tendency, a pattern, a leaning toward continuity. They were not yet DNA as we know it, nor even the precise elegance of a double helix. They were rough drafts, sketches of what memory might one day become. Imagine the ocean as a vast library still waiting for its books. The fragile chains drifting through its tides were like scribbles in the margins, early attempts at writing. Some strokes vanished in the waves, others smudged before they could mean anything, but a few endured long enough to suggest words. These proto-strands, these precursors, carried within them the faint outline of heredity. They were molecules that not only existed, but seemed to encourage their own likeness to arise nearby. They were not yet memories, but they were practice, rehearsals for remembrance. One of the most promising of these ancestors was RNA, or something very much like it. In the quiet chemistry of the sea, certain chains discovered they could be both scribes and actors. They could hold information in their sequence, a record of letters strung in a line, but they could also fold into shapes that acted, catalyzing reactions, encouraging other letters to join or part. They were not mere spectators in the dance. They were dancers who also carried the memory of the steps. This dual role was extraordinary, though no eye yet recognized it, no mind yet named it. The ocean simply allowed it, patiently repeating the experiment until it became a habit of the world. Picture one of these strands caught in the hollow of a mineral rock, warmed gently by the heat of a vent. Its backbone holds, its sequence persists, and for a brief span it acts as a template. Letters floating nearby feel drawn to it, guided by its rhythm, settling into place beside it. The copy is rough, imperfect, missing pieces or adding extras, but it is an echo. For the first time, something in the world resembles something else not by chance, but because the first invited the second to be like it. That echo is the earliest whisper of heredity, the faintest hint of memory stirring in the deep. In tidal pools near volcanic shores, the same process unfolded in a different way. A strand left behind when the water receded curled on the hot rock, its letters held together by heat, then cooled and revived when the tide returned. In the repetition of this cycle, it sometimes coaxed new strands into being, like a melody teaching itself to hum again. The copies were not perfect, they were never perfect, but they were close enough to carry resemblance. And resemblance, repeated across ages, is the seed of memory. The ancestors of memory were fragile, like all things in that early world. They broke easily, dissolved readily, and only rarely lasted more than a cycle or two. Yet each time they returned, each time they managed to echo themselves, they pushed the ocean a little closer to continuity. The sea was learning to keep its own secrets, to carry information not just in chemistry, but in patterns of order. There is something profoundly cozy in imagining these precursors, these humble ancestors. They had no awareness of what they were doing, no goal, no purpose. Yet they practiced the art of memory in silence, rehearsing the role that would one day become central to all of life. They were the rough sketches that made the masterpiece possible, the pencil outlines beneath the final painting. Without them, there could have been no DNA, no genetic code, no inheritance. Without them, every dawn would have been a reset, every attempt forgotten by night. Instead, the ocean began to remember, faintly at first, but enough to keep a shape, to echo a sequence, to invite resemblance. Enough to plant the idea of continuity in a world that had only ever known cycles of creation and dissolution. These were the ancestors of memory, and though their voices were faint, they were the first whispers in the great story of life. And so the ocean, with patience as deep as time itself, cradled these ancestors gently. It let them fold, let them echo, let them dissolve, then begin again. With each attempt, the echoes grew a little stronger, the memories a little clearer. The fragile chains were becoming more than songs, more than dancers. They were becoming storytellers, carrying the first faint tales from one moment to the next. In their presence, the silence of the world shifted. It was no longer just the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something beginning to keep its own record. And though it would be ages yet before that record became the language of genes, the principle was already in place. The ocean had discovered memory, and memory would never be forgotten. For ages, the ocean had sung fragile songs and spun fleeting chains, but now something extraordinary began to stir. The threads no longer only drifted, breaking apart when the tide grew too strong. They began to hint at a power that would change the world forever, the power to copy themselves. Not perfectly, not reliably, but enough to suggest a new possibility. Imagine a strand lying quietly in a shallow pool after the storm. Its spine is delicate, yet steady enough to survive the day. Around it, loose letters drift in the water, pulled this way and that by the movements of tide and breeze. The strand does not reach for them, for it has no will. Yet by its very nature, by the rhythm of its structure, it calls them close. The letters seem to recognize where they might fit, settling alongside the strand like dancers falling into step with a partner. One clasp here, another there, until, almost without effort, a shadow of the strand is traced beside it. It is not yet life, but it is the first rehearsal of life's central act, replication. The copies were clumsy at first. They missed steps, stumbled often, made errors more often than not. A letter would settle in the wrong place or fail to settle at all. A whole section might be skipped. Yet for every imperfect echo, there was one that held close enough to resemble the original, close enough to carry the rhythm forward. And resemblance, even imperfect, was the seed of memory. In the dark chambers of the deep, where hydrothermal vents released their shimmering warmth, the process unfolded as well. Strands drifted along mineral shelves, getting new letters into place. The mineral surfaces steadied them, pressing molecules against the pattern until another thread took shape. Sometimes the new thread was short, sometimes mismatched, but other times it curved in perfect sympathy with its parent. In these secret halls, in the hush of the abyss, the ocean had found a way to whisper to itself, repeat, repeat, repeat. What made this moment so powerful was its persistence. Before, when chains broke, their story ended. The fragile songs faded, the dances dissolved, the ocean had to begin again from silence. But now, a thread could teach another to sing its song and could pass its dance into new hands. The world had discovered a way to keep a melody alive across generations of molecules, and though the voices were faint and the songs still full of errors, they were carried forward rather than lost. Picture a tide pool at dawn. The water has receded, leaving strands curled on the warm stone. Letters gather around them, aligning shyly, repeating their rhythm. When the tide returns, it carries both the old and the new into the ocean's embrace. Two threads now drift where once there was one. They may not survive long, but they have already proven the principle. The story does not have to end with silence. It can continue. This was more than survival, it was continuity. The ocean was no longer starting over every day. It was beginning to build, to accumulate, to carry the memory of what had come before into what was still to come. Each copy, even flawed, was a promise that the future could echo the past. Each thread was a bridge across time, however narrow, however fragile. There is a gentle beauty in imagining this. The ocean, once only a cauldron of chance, was becoming a library of patterns. Each thread a line, each copy a verse, each error a variation in the song. The earth was learning to write, to preserve, to remember. It was the birth of heredity, though no creature yet existed to inherit. It was the beginning of history, though no one yet lived to tell it. And so the ocean held its threads close, letting them copy and echo, letting them falter and try again. With every success, the world grew more practiced at memory. With every attempt, the blueprint of life grew clearer. Copying the thread was not yet perfect, but it was enough. Enough to turn the fragile songs into stories, the dances into traditions, the fleeting chains into a lineage. In time, those copies would become more faithful. Errors would lessen, patterns would sharpen, memory would strengthen. But even now, in their imperfect echoes, the threads had crossed a threshold. The world no longer forgot everything it learned. It had found a way to remember, and in that remembering lay the heart of life itself. The threads that had learned to copy themselves were fragile beyond measure. They could dissolve with the rise of a tide, snap with the shift of a current, or unravel in the chill of night. Yet despite their frailty, they endured. They endured because the earth itself seemed to guard them, not with intention or design, but with the gifts of chance, scattered like lanterns along their path. These guardians were not beings, not creatures, but forces, simple, elemental, eternal. They watched over the ocean's delicate threads without knowing they did so, each playing its quiet part in nurturing the first echoes of memory. One guardian was lightning, the restless voice of the sky. Every storm, every strike, poured energy into the ocean's chemistry, jolting molecules into action, splitting bonds and forging new ones. Each flash was a reminder that life requires fire, that the music of creation needs sparks to set its rhythm. When the threads drifted through shallow pools, still warm from lightning's touch, they found energy enough to bind, to lengthen, to hold a little tighter. In this way, lightning stood as a fierce protector, dangerous and wild, yet also a giver of possibility. Another guardian was heat, the breath of the planet itself. From the dark chimneys of the seafloor, warmth spilled into the abyss, creating havens where threads could linger. Too much heat would destroy them, too little would leave them still and broken, but in the in-between, at the edges of vent and current, they found shelter. Here the guardianship of heat was subtle, like a hearth glowing in the dark, not too fierce, not too faint, offering just enough to keep the fragile songs alive. Stone, too, was a guardian. Mineral surfaces, with their cracks and grooves, cradled the threads like careful hands. They steadied the molecules, aligned them, and offered patterns upon which bonds could form. Clay and crystal became quiet teachers, showing the letters how to line up, how to repeat, how to copy. Without these stone scribes, the ocean's alphabet might have remained scattered forever. Instead, the guardianship of minerals lent order to chaos, turning drift into direction. Even the tides played their part, guardians of rhythm and patience. The rising and falling waters pressed the threads through cycles of concentration and release. Drying pools drew letters closer, returning waves mixed them again. These cycles were lessons, teaching the threads resilience, showing them how to endure change. What seemed a hardship, the endless ebb and flow, was in truth a gift. It was repetition, the teacher of memory, the shaper of habit. And above it all, time was the greatest guardian. Not a force that struck or burned or pressed, but a presence that never hurried and never ceased. Time gave the threads what they needed most: opportunity. Millions of years, countless storms, endless tides, All of it added up to patience enough for fragile songs to become traditions, for fleeting chains to become something more. Without time, even lightning and stone could not have saved them. With time, even the smallest success could be repeated until it became inevitable. Together, these guardians wove a protective circle around the ocean's earliest patterns, not with intention, not with foresight, but simply by being what they were. Lightning struck, heat flowed, stone waited, tides turned, time endured. Each force indifferent, yet together, they formed a cradle strong enough to hold life's first whispers. Imagine the scene, a tidal pool glistening beneath a storm. Lightning flashes, warming the water, splitting gases into new fragments. The rock beneath, ridged and steady, cradles fragile threads across its surface. Heat from within the earth keeps the pool from chilling too quickly, while the tide, patient as ever, breathes in and out, stirring the water with rhythm. Around it all stretches the vast silence of time, watching, waiting, never rushing. The guardians are present, unseen but certain, keeping watch not through will but through constancy. It is cozy to think of these guardians not as accidents, but as caretakers, each adding their strength to the story. They were the world's quiet promise that fragility need not mean failure, that even the most delicate songs can be sheltered long enough to grow strong. And though they had no awareness of their role, the legacy of their guardianship lives on in every thread of DNA, every cell, every breath of life. For without chance, there could be no creation. And without guardianship, chance could not endure long enough to become destiny. The fragile songs of the ocean had found protectors, and in their care, the first true steps toward life continued. The ocean had spent ages humming fragile songs, scattering threads across tides and stone, allowing lightning, heat, and minerals to be their guardians. But now, within the endless patience of time, a new note emerged in the symphony of creation, a note that would linger longer, resonate deeper, and hum with a steadiness that the world had not yet known. This was the song of stability. The first chains had been tentative things, fragile as spider silk, breaking with the softest touch of wave or wind. They dissolved when the waters grew too cold, snapped when the heat grew too fierce, and unraveled in the restless churn of the tides. But through their endless rehearsals, they had learned. Each failure trimmed what was weak, each success preserved what was strong. Slowly, patiently, the threads discovered a sturdier rhythm, a way of holding their shape against the trials of the sea. Imagine a single strand lying across a mineral ridge in a quiet tide pool. Once, it might have dissolved by nightfall, but this time it holds. The heat of the afternoon dries the pool, concentrating its letters, drawing them closer, tightening its bonds. When the tide returns, it does not wash the strand away. It lifts it gently, carrying it into deeper water, where it drifts without unraveling. This survival is small, almost unnoticeable in the immensity of time. Yet it matters, for the strand has proven it can endure, and endurance is the first step toward permanence. In the depths, too, stability was being rehearsed. Along the walls of hydrothermal chimneys, strands folded into shapes that braced them against the shifting currents. Some curled into loops, others twisted into hairpins, small but sturdy arrangements that lasted longer than the straight and unbending chains of before. The folding was like the posture of a tree bending in the wind, not resistance, but flexibility. By bending, they endured. By enduring, they lingered long enough to invite new bonds, new letters, new possibilities. The song of stability was not a sudden chorus, but a gradual deepening of tone. Each cycle of tide, each burst of lightning, each pulse of heat added its voice. Where once the ocean sang only in fragile, fleeting notes, now it began to hold chords. Strands persisted through nights, through days, through storms. Their voices carried farther, echoed longer. The sea was learning how to sing without silence interrupting every refrain. There is a cozy poetry in imagining this change. The ocean, once a restless improviser, began to settle into a melody it could return to again and again. It was still full of variation, still full of errors and dissolutions, but beneath it all was a growing steadiness, like a heartbeat beneath a lullaby. The fragile songs had become fragile traditions, and tradition, repeated long enough, became stability. Picture a stormy night on the young earth. Lightning splits the sky, thunder rolls across the sea, waves crash against blackened stone. Beneath the fury, in a shallow pool sheltered by a rocky outcrop, strands drift together. They fold, they clasp, they hold. The storm rages above them, but in the calm pocket below they endure. By morning, when the sun rises pale and weak over the horizon, those same strands still rest there, intact. The pool has become a chamber of memory, the ocean's first attempt at keeping a song through the night. The importance of this stability cannot be overstated. Without it, the ocean's fragile experiments would always have begun anew, every dawn a blank page. But with it, the story could carry forward unbroken. Stability meant that copies could be made not just in echo, but in succession. Stability meant that the ocean could remember longer, build higher, reach further. In this way, the Song of Stability was not merely chemistry, but the first heartbeat of heredity. It was the transition from silence to memory, from accident to persistence. It was the earth learning how to hum a melody so steady that it could become the foundation of life's eternal song. The threads, once fragile whispers, were becoming sturdier notes in the ocean's orchestra. Their bonds were stronger, their folds more clever, their voices more enduring. And in their quiet resilience, the ocean discovered how to keep time, not in seconds or hours, but in generations of molecules, each carrying forward the memory of those who came before. The Song of Stability had begun. It would grow louder, richer, and more confident with each passing age. But even now, in its earliest whispers, it carried a promise that fragility could become strength, that chance could become tradition, that life's music could last. The ocean had learned to hold its songs a little longer, to hum its melodies with a steadier voice. Yet even with this new stability, the path forward was not simple. For every strand that endured, 1,000 others still failed. For every echo that lingered, countless others dissolved into silence. The world was not yet a place of certainty. It was a place of experiments, millions upon millions of them, carried out in every tide pool, every vent, every corner of the restless sea. This was the true nature of the early Earth, a vast and tireless workshop. The ocean was not guided by a single plan or path, but by endless variation. I tried everything. It spun chains in shallow pools that dried under the pale sun, where concentration pressed letters together in tight embrace. It spun other chains in the dark vents of the abyss, where heat and minerals guided them into unexpected folds. It allowed some to form along clay and crystal, their surfaces aligning the strands like scribes laying words across a page. And it allowed others to float free, aimless but hopeful, carried by waves into whatever meeting chance provided. Imagine looking down into the waters of that ancient time. What you would see is not a single, orderly process, but a chaos of experiments. Strands of different lengths, shapes, and patterns floated together and apart. Some folded tightly, some sprawled loosely. Some repeated their forms, others dissolved before they could finish themselves. The ocean was like a painter with an infinite canvas, layering color upon color, stroke upon stroke, testing every possibility, discarding most, but never running out of patience. Most of these experiments failed. The majority of strands broke too quickly, dissolved too easily, or carried patterns too unstable to be remembered. Entire lineages of fragile forms appeared and vanished without leaving a trace. They were like songs sung once and never again, melodies lost to the silence of the deep. Yet even those failures mattered, for they freed the letters to try anew. Nothing was wasted. Every dissolution was another chance, another roll of the dice, another rehearsal of what might one day last. Among these countless experiments, some stood out, not because they were perfect, but because they were just a little stronger, just a little more resilient. One strand folded in such a way that it shielded its weakest joints, and so it survived an extra day. Another managed to copy itself more faithfully, passing along a sequence that remained recognizable across several generations. Another bent into a loop that protected it from being torn apart in the tides. Small victories, humble improvements, but together they began to shape the direction of memory. Picture a rocky shoreline at dusk. The pools scattered across its surface are small worlds unto themselves. In one, strands drift aimlessly, breaking and reforming without progress. In another, a cluster of chains cling to a mineral surface, copying one another imperfectly but insistently. Some copies are flawed, others more accurate, but in their collective persistence, a tradition is being born. In yet another pool, the letters arrange themselves into new patterns entirely, strange and fleeting, never to be repeated. Each pool sings its own song, and together they create a chorus of experiments. In the deep ocean, the experiments were grander still. The vents created gradients of heat and chemistry so diverse that every crevice was a new trial. Some strands perished immediately in the boiling water, while others found balance at the edges, where warmth and cool met in harmony. These edge-dwellers lasted longer, repeating themselves often enough to establish footholds in the dark. The abyss became a playground of chemistry, a place where the ancestors of memory were tested again and again, refined by failure, strengthened by chance. There is a cozy comfort in this chaos, a reassurance that the world did not demand perfection all at once. It allowed trial after trial, experiment after experiment without hurry. It was patient with its mistakes, generous with its attempts. Life did not arrive as a finished masterpiece, but as countless sketches, erased and redrawn until something sturdy enough emerged. The earth was not a strict teacher, but a gentle one, letting its students stumble, fall, and try again without punishment, offering them time as their greatest gift. And so the ocean was filled with diversity, with experiments that flickered and vanished like sparks in the night. Some left faint traces, subtle influences on the patterns to come. Others vanished completely, never to return. But together, they created a foundation not of certainty, but of possibility. Possibility upon possibility, layered endlessly until the improbable became inevitable. The song of stability had been joined by the chorus of variation. The ocean was no longer singing in a single voice, but in 100,000, all different, all fleeting, all part of the same story. And from that chorus, in time, would rise the first true harmony of life. Along the young Earth's restless coastlines, where black volcanic cliffs met the endless sea, there were places of quiet magic. Shallow pools, carved into the stone by wind, wave, and time, dotted the shores like mirrors of the sky. They were small compared to the vast ocean beyond, but within them, the earliest strands of memory found sanctuaries, nurseries where chance could play in peace. These were the tidal pools of wonder. By day, the pale sun spilled its light across them, warming their waters. By night, the storms above mirrored themselves in their surfaces, each flash of lightning turning them into tiny lanterns scattered along the coast. They filled and emptied with the rhythm of the tides, inhaling the sea's chemistry with each return and concentrating it again as the water evaporated. In this way, the pools breathed with the ocean, though at their own slower, gentler pace. Imagine wandering along that rocky shore. The air is heavy with the scent of salt and sulfur, the hiss of steam rising where seawater touches hot stone. Beneath your feet, cracks in the rock cradle small basins of water, each one a world unto itself. Some are wide and shallow, shimmering under the sun. Others are narrow and deep, shadows pooled in stone. Each holds a unique chemistry, a unique stage for the threads drifting within. In some, the water is warm and gentle, coaxing the fragile chains to fold and hold. In others, the cycles of drying and refilling push the letters into tighter embrace, teaching them endurance. No two pools are alike, and in this diversity lay the ocean's greatest strength. The tidal pools were patient teachers. When the sun baked their surfaces, the water thinned, concentrating the molecules inside. The letters, once scattered, found themselves pressed close together, forced into contact they might never have made in the vastness of the open sea. Bonds formed, broke, and reformed, each cycle a rehearsal. When the tide returned, it lifted the strands back into gentle motion, carrying them into new meetings, new alignments. The pools taught persistence, the art of survival through change. There is a quiet coziness in imagining these pools at dusk. The storm has passed, and the wind is calm. The pools glow softly, catching the last light of the sun, while within them strands drift and settle. Some cling to the mineral ridges that line the basin. Others fold into shapes steadier than before. The air is still, the water warm, and for a few hours the fragile songs within are left undisturbed. These pools, so small and unassuming, became the cradles of memory, the places where the earth learned to hum its first lasting melodies. In their diversity, the pools explored countless possibilities. One pool, shallow and sunlit, favored strands that endured heat and dryness. Another, shaded and cool, favored those that folded tightly against dissolution. Yet another, touched by minerals leaching from volcanic stone, favored strands that copied themselves more readily. Each pool told its own story, and together they created a patchwork of experiments. It was not one path, but many, weaving together like threads of a tapestry. Failures were constant. Most strands dissolved with the next tide, leaving nothing behind. Yet failure in these pools was never wasted. Each vanishing freed the letters for new arrangements, each broken strand a lesson written into the chemistry of the waters. The pools remembered not in thought, but in habit, shaping the conditions that made survival just a little more likely with every cycle. To the coastline at night, under sky heavy with stars, the tide has pulled back, leaving the pools glistening like jewels in the moonlight. Within them, fragile strands drift in silence, carried only by the faint movements of the water. They are not alive, not yet, but they are something more than chance. They are rehearsals, experiments, possibilities waiting for the next dawn. The pools, in their quiet way, are guardians of the future, small sanctuaries that will nurture the first true steps toward life. It is comforting to think that life did not begin in a single moment, in a single place, but in countless hidden cradles like these. The tidal pools of wonder were scattered across the earth, each humming its own quiet tune, each teaching the ocean how to carry its fragile songs forward. They were nurseries of chance, gardens of patience, where the letters of life first learned how to speak in sentences. And though they were small, insignificant against the scale of the sea, their role was vast. For in their waters, memory took root. In their cycles, heredity found its rhythm. In their quiet sanctuaries, the story of life began to turn from possibility into inevitability. Far below the reach of sunlight, beneath the rolling waves and storm-laden seas, there lay another world, vast, dark, and secret. Here in the abyss, the seafloor split and cracked under the restless breath of the planet, and from those fissures rose towering chimneys of stone. They exhaled plumes of heated water rich with minerals, glowing faintly in the darkness like lanterns in a cave. These were the hydrothermal vents, and they whispered quietly to the deep, nurturing experiments of their own. The waters around them were strange and full of contrast. Boiling streams poured from the vents, while only a short distance away, the deep ocean pressed cold and still. Where the two currents mingled, chemistry blossomed. The sharp meeting of hot and cold, of mineral and salt, created gradients, invisible layers in which molecules danced. One step too near the vent, and they were torn apart by heat. One step too far into the abyss, and they drifted into silence. But in that delicate middle space, in the gentle balance between extremes, possibility stirred. Imagine the silence of this place. The ocean above is full of crashing tides and roaring storms, but here in the deep, there is no thunder, no lightning, no wind, only the slow hiss of the vents, the constant exhale of the earth. The black chimneys loom, their sides coated in shimmering deposits of iron and sulfur. Streams of superheated water rise like ghostly veils, twisting upward before dissolving into the cold. It is a cathedral of stone and heat, silent but alive with hidden music. In these shadowed halls, strands of molecules found shelter. The minerals along the vent walls offered scaffolds, surfaces where letters could line up, where chains could grow longer, steadier, stronger. The warmth from the vents kept the waters alive with energy, while the cold beyond offered stability, cooling fragile bonds before they could unravel. Here, in this balance, the whispers of the deep became teachers, guiding the fragile threads toward memory. The experiments of the abyss were countless. Some strands folded into compact shapes, protected from the turbulence around them. Others stretched along mineral ridges, coaxing new letters to join. Some copied themselves crudely, creating echoes that drifted briefly before breaking apart. Most dissolved in moments, forgotten as quickly as they began. Yet the deep was patient, and every failure freed space for another attempt. The whispers never ceased. There is a cozy comfort in imagining these vents as guardians of hidden possibility. While the world above raged with storm and fire, the abyss remained steady, a dark sanctuary where chemistry could linger undisturbed. No tide came to sweep the pools away. No lightning tore the sky overhead. Only the slow, steady exhale of the earth, warming the water in a rhythm as constant as a heartbeat. The vents whispered softly, telling the ocean to try again and again and again. Picture a strand drifting near a vent wall. Heat stirs it into motion, folding it into a loop. A mineral surface steadies its form, holding it long enough for other letters to join. The cold beyond cools the bonds, helping them set. For the first time, the strand holds its shape through the night. In that survival, fragile as it is, lies progress. In that single thread, whispered into existence by stone and water, lies the faintest echo of life to come. The deep was not silent, it was filled with whispers, not in words, not in sound, but in chemistry, in patterns repeated over and over until they became traditions. The whispers said, "Endure here, fold this way, clasp tighter, let go, try again." Each whisper was a lesson, passed into the molecules themselves, etched into their bonds, preserved in their echoes. And though no eyes yet saw, no ears yet heard, the deep was alive with these lessons. The hydrothermal vents became classrooms, their mineral walls chalkboards upon which the first instructions were written. Not yet DNA, not yet code, but the precursors of both, songs of order in a sea of chance, whispers of memory in the silence of the abyss. There is comfort in knowing that life did not emerge from a single cradle alone. The tidal pools sang their songs beneath the storms, and the deep vents whispered their secrets in the dark. Together, they carried the story forward, two voices in harmony, one in the light, one in the shadows. And between them, the fragile chains learned to endure, to copy, to remember. The whispers in the deep continue even now. The vents still breathe, their mineral towers still exhaling warmth into the abyss. And though life has long since filled the oceans, their whispers remain, echoes of the first lessons ever taught on Earth. They remind us that life began not with certainty, but with patience. Not with perfection, but with endless quiet attempts, whispered softly into the dark until the melody of life could finally take hold. The ocean had hummed its fragile songs, spun its countless experiments, and whispered its lessons both in shallow pools and in the abyssal dark. For uncounted ages, the story had been one of fragility, strands forming only to vanish, melodies beginning only to fade, echoes breaking before they could carry far. But slowly, patiently, the earth had been teaching its own creations how to endure. And now, after millions upon millions of rehearsals, some strands began to cross a threshold. They shifted from the fleeting to the lasting. They were becoming not only fragile, but forever. This forever was not permanent as we know it today. The strands did not yet form the sturdy double helix that would one day endure in every living cell. They did not yet carry long codes or full blueprints, but they had learned how to resist the silence, how to hold through cycles of tide and storm, and how to echo themselves more faithfully than before. They had learned the art of persistence, and persistence is the root of forever. Picture a tide pool at dusk, the water shrinking back under the warmth of the setting sun. Within its shallows, letters are pressed close together, some aligning into short chains, others drifting free. For countless cycles, these chains had dissolved with the next tide. Yet on this evening, something remarkable happens. A strand folds upon itself in a way that shields its weakest joints. Another drifts close and echoes its form. Together they remain, not for hours but for days, long enough to survive the coming storms. When the tide returns, they are not washed away. Instead, they are carried gently into the sea where their song continues. They are no longer fragile experiments. They are traditions becoming strong enough to endure. In the deep, where the hydrothermal vents whispered in steady warmth, similar miracles unfolded. Chains that once unraveled quickly now held their shapes through the night. They survived the mixing of hot and cold, the turbulence of the currents, the restlessness of the abyss. Some even began to copy themselves with such consistency that their echoes looked almost identical to their originals. This was not perfection, but it was continuity strong enough to matter. The whispers in the deep had taught them well: bend, fold, adapt, and so they did. The difference between fragile and forever is subtle but profound. Fragile things vanish with the smallest change. Forever things, though still delicate, can endure through the chaos around them. They do not fight the storm, they learn how to live within it. These early strands, still simple, still humble, discovered ways of folding, ways of clasping, ways of repeating that gave them stability in a world that had once erased them. And with stability came permanence. It is cozy to imagine the world at this time, knowing that something so small, so invisible, was carrying forward the first glimmers of forever. The ocean was still vast and empty of creatures. The seas still rolled with storms, the land still breathed fire. But within that chaos, threads of memory drifted that would never again be entirely lost. For once continuity is born, it cannot be undone. Once a song learns how to keep itself alive, silence can no longer erase it completely. Failures still outnumbered successes by immeasurable margins. For every strand that endured, countless others broke. Yet endurance does not need to be common. It only needs to be possible. And now, for the first time, it was possible in truth. A thread could survive the night, survive the tide, survive the storm. A chain could copy itself faithfully enough to create a lineage. These were small victories in the scale of the cosmos, yet they were everything to the story of life. Picture the ocean at twilight. The waves crash against volcanic cliffs and the tide retreats, leaving behind its scattered pools. In one of those pools, a strand folds tightly, its shape steady and true. Lightning flashes overhead, and for a brief moment the pool glows. When the light fades, the strand still lingers. Morning comes and it remains. Evening falls and it still drifts intact. Against the endless tide of dissolution, something has begun to last. That simple survival is the beginning of forever. The ocean's song had changed. It was no longer only a chorus of fragile whispers breaking before they could be remembered. It was becoming a hymn of endurance, a melody strong enough to echo through the ages. The first forever had arrived, not perfect, not complete, but present. And from that moment, the story of life could no longer be erased. The strands were still only beginnings, still only whispers of what would one day be DNA. Yet they had crossed a line no tide could wash away. They had proven that memory could last, that heredity could hold, that the fragile could become forever. And in that shift, the world itself changed. It was no longer only an ocean of chance. It was an ocean of continuity. For so long, the Earth had known only darkness and storm. Its oceans boiled and cooled, its seas split with fire, its land heaved with molten breath. Yet through it all, the fragile threads of memory had endured, teaching themselves how to hold, how to fold, how to copy. Now something new was stirring, a change so subtle it could not be seen in a single day, nor in 1,000. It was not marked by trumpets or fire, nor by any grand spectacle. It was quieter than silence, slower than time itself. It was the unseen dawn. This dawn was not of light, for the skies were still restless and thick with clouds. It was not of sound, for no voice yet sang above the ocean's roar. It was the dawn of continuity, a dawn of heredity, a dawn of molecules that no longer vanished with each cycle of tide and storm, but instead carried their song forward, generation upon generation. Imagine standing at the edge of that ancient shore. The tide recedes, and the pools glitter under a pale, veiled sun. Within them drift strands that have survived not just hours, but days, perhaps even weeks. They fold tightly against the world's chaos, copy themselves with enough faithfulness to echo their form, and endure long enough to matter. You would not see them with your eyes, they are too small, too hidden. But if you could feel with the patience of the earth itself, you would know something has shifted. In the deep, where the hydrothermal vents glow in the eternal dark, the whispers have grown louder. Strands that once dissolved now last through cycle after cycle. They pass their shapes into new copies, which in turn pass their shapes onward still. This is no longer chance alone, it is tradition. A lineage is forming in the silence, an inheritance written not in words, but in bonds. The abyss is alive with unseen memory, carried quietly forward on the backs of fragile chains that no longer break so easily. The unseen dawn is like the first blush of light before sunrise, when the world still seems dark but the day has already begun. The fragile threads were still rare, still surrounded by failure, but they were no longer alone. They had become a presence, a pattern woven into the ocean's fabric. Even when storms raged above, even when tides crashed against blackened cliffs, the memory endured somewhere, whether in a sheltered pool, a mineral ridge, or the warmth of the abyss. The ocean had learned how to keep its stories alive. There is a cozy wonder in imagining this dawn. The world, vast and violent, was unaware of what it carried. The storms did not know they were cradling the seeds of life. The tides did not know they were rocking the first cribs of memory. The vents did not know they were singing lullabies into the abyss. Yet together, they had nurtured something new, a continuity strong enough to bridge the gulf between yesterday and tomorrow. This dawn was unseen because it unfolded too slowly for any witness to mark it. No line divided the fragile past from the forever future. It was a blur of countless cycles, a soft and gradual rising, like the pale brightening of a sky long before the sun crests the horizon. Yet when we look back across the ocean of time, we can see it clearly. The moment when memory ceased to vanish, when heredity began to hold, when the world stopped starting over and began, at last, to continue. Picture it: a storm passes, leaving the coast quiet. The tide pools gleam under faint starlight, each one a world of its own. Within them drift strands, still delicate, still small, but unbroken, carrying echoes of themselves into the next tide. In the deep, vents glow steadily, their warmth keeping other strands alive through the night. Across the world, in countless small corners, the same quiet miracle repeats. Continuity hums across the planet, soft as a lullaby, steady as a heartbeat. It is the dawn of life, though no creature yet knows it. And so, in patience and silence, the unseen dawn stretched across the earth. No eye watched it, no voice greeted it, no sun heralded it. Yet it was the greatest dawn of all, for it would rise every song, every story, every life that ever was and ever will be. From the unseen dawn, when fragile chains first began to hold themselves steady against the tides of chance, there emerged something more profound still, a thread unbroken, stretching forward across the ages. This was no longer a world where memory dissolved with each nightfall. It was a world in which memory began to last, a world in which echoes became traditions and traditions became inheritance. Out of the countless songs, dances, and whispers of the ocean, a single melody began to carry through the silence. It was the eternal thread. This thread was not visible. You could not hold it in your hand or see it glimmer across the water. It existed within the patterns of molecules, within the sequences of letters that arranged themselves along fragile chains. Each bond was a stitch, each fold a knot, each replication a weaving. Together, they formed a tapestry that would never again be wholly unraveled. Imagine the ocean now as a vast loom, weaving strand after strand upon its mineral spindles. Some threads still broke, some patterns still dissolved, but here and there a line endured. Those lines copied themselves, carrying their form into the next moment, the next cycle, the next age. With every echo, the thread grew longer. With every copy, it gained another stitch. Soon, it was not just a fragment, but a ribbon winding its way through time, fragile but continuous. The eternal thread was not a single strand, but the principle of continuity itself. Wherever memory persisted, the thread was present. In tidal pools warmed by the day, it curled and copied itself, waiting for the tide to return. In the deep, where vents whispered their warmth, it folded and unfolded, repeating its song in silence. Across the world, in every hidden cradle, the thread stretched a little farther, binding yesterday to tomorrow. It is comforting to imagine this thread as something soft and steady, like yarn spun by unseen hands, winding itself across the fabric of the earth. Each copy was another loop in its weave, each survival another length added. Even when a strand dissolved, the thread itself did not break, for another copy carried its song onward. In this way, continuity became stronger than fragility, memory stronger than silence. The eternal thread was more than endurance, it was an inheritance. For the first time, the world could pass something of itself forward, not just chance, but order, not just presence, but resemblance. A pattern could survive long enough to invite another into its likeness, and that likeness could invite another still. The thread was not merely chemistry, it was history, written not in ink, but in bonds of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, preserved in the salt and breath of the sea. Picture the ocean at night, stars hidden behind storm clouds. The waves roll in heavy silence, but beneath them, countless threads drift, fold, and copy. Most are short-lived, their songs fading quickly, but a few endure. Those few carry their sequence into the next tide, and then into the next. Somewhere in that unseen persistence, a story has begun. It is not yet a story with words or voices, but it is a story nonetheless. One written in the alphabet of molecules, a story of memory carried forward without end. The eternal thread stretches even to us. Every cell in every creature alive today, every plant that leans toward the sun, every creature that swims, every bird that flies, every human who speaks, laughs, and dreams, all carry within them a piece of that ancient ribbon. The very DNA that shapes us is the descendant of those first fragile chains, the survivors of countless storms and tides. The thread that began in the Archean Ocean has never broken. It has passed, unbroken, through billions of years, winding itself through every living thing, tying us all together in a single continuous line. There is a profound coziness in knowing this, that inside you, inside me, inside every blade of grass and every drifting leaf, there is a whisper from that ancient ocean, a memory carried not in thought, but in the shape of a molecule, a song written long before voices existed. The eternal thread binds us all, a reminder that we are not separate from that ancient dawn, but its direct continuation. And so the ocean, with its infinite patience, gave the world its greatest gift, a thread that would never again be lost, a story that would never again be silenced. The eternal thread had been woven, and in its quiet, steady strength lay the foundation for everything to come. The story of the ocean's fragile songs, of its countless experiments, of the guardians that sheltered its threads, and of the dawn that rose unseen, all of it has led us here. To the eternal thread, woven from chance and persistence, carried across eons of silence and storm. Yet the story does not end there, for the thread still weaves, still carries, still whispers. It has never stopped. It has never broken. It moves through us now, as softly as it moved through the first molecules of the sea. This is the whisper through time. It began in silence, with molecules drifting in warm pools and dark abysses. It grew stronger as strands learned to copy themselves, as patterns became traditions, as fragile songs became enduring melodies. It stretched forward as the first true heredity took hold, passing resemblance from one generation of molecules to the next. And then, across the ages, that whisper became louder. It became the voice of cells, the song of organisms, the chorus of life in all its forms. Imagine, if you will, leaning close to the ocean on a quiet night. The waves roll against the shore, steady, eternal, their rhythm unchanged across billions of years. In that rhythm is the same patience that once guided molecules into threads, the same persistence that once nurtured memory from fragility. When the tide whispers against the rocks, it is echoing its first lessons: endure, copy, remember. The whisper lives in you as well. Every cell of your body carries DNA, a thread unbroken from that ancient sea. The sequences in your genes are not only instructions for your being, they are echoes of the earliest songs the earth ever sang. They are whispers from pools warmed by lightning, whispers from vents glowing in the deep, whispers from strands that folded and held against the tide. You are a collection of whispers that never faded, a living continuation of the memory first cradled by the ocean. This whisper is not loud. It does not shout its presence. It is gentle, cozy, almost hidden, like a secret carried in the heart of time. It flows quietly through every living thing, binding us together in one unbroken story. The trees stretching toward the sky, the birds singing at dawn, the whales swimming in the sea, the humans dreaming under the stars, all are voices added to the same whisper, woven into the same eternal thread. The beauty of this whisper lies not only in its endurance, but in its humility. It began not as a grand design, but as chance, letters colliding in water, bonds forming and breaking, patience repeating them until they held. Out of silence and fragility came the possibility of memory. Out of memory came heredity. Out of heredity came life. And through it all, the whisper never stopped. Picture yourself now, listening to this story in the stillness. The room is quiet. Perhaps outside, the wind moves through the trees, or rain falls softly against the earth. Somewhere far away, the ocean still breathes, its tides moving in rhythms older than mountains, older than stars as we see them now. And in that tide, in its endless whisper, is the same story that shaped the molecules drifting in its pools 4 billion years ago. The Archean Ocean has not gone. It is alive in you, alive in me, alive in all of us. Every heartbeat, every breath, every glance at the sky is a continuation of that whisper through time. It is the ocean's way of reminding us, you are not separate from me, you are my memory, you are my song, you are proof that my whispers were never lost. And so we close this chapter, not with an ending, but with a continuation. For the whisper moves still, carried in every living thread, passed quietly from one generation to the next. It is patient, it is gentle, it is eternal. It began in the Archean seas, in the fragile songs of molecules, and it flows now through all the voices of life. The whisper through time is still speaking, and if you listen closely, in the tide, in the wind, in your very self, you can hear it. The same soft word, repeated endlessly across all of history: remember.